let me first present to you the panel here. My name is Mina Billing. I'll start actually with you, Ardavan. We're not only second cousins. Ardavan is a multidisciplinary person. He's a political scientist, associate researcher at Begin Sadat Center of Strategic Studies. He's a criminologist, associate professor at Lund University and a medical doctor. Ardavan has published many interesting articles about Iran issues, especially about the IRGC and the Islamic Republic's lobbying organization. And then we have Pooyan Tamimi Arab. He has also a multidisciplinary background. He has studied art history, philosophy, and anthropology. He's currently an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at pronunciation of the university. Maybe you want to take it. Utrecht. Yeah. He's also a founding member of the group for analyzing and measuring attitudes in Iran, GAMMON, which has conducted very insightful research and surveys about Iran issues. Last but not least, we have Fredrik Malm. He's a member of the Swedish Parliament for the Liberal Party. He's also a writer and a journalist. He's been engaged in foreign policy issues and more specifically Middle East and Iran issues. He's been an active voice against the Islamic Republic lobbyists in Sweden during the last decades in Swedish media. Let's discuss the different forms of lobbying and influencing public and decision makers by Islamic Republic.
This is not an issue really about freedom of speech. Everyone knows that we have freedom of speech. It's not illegal to argue the same way as the Islamic Republic is doing or follow their narratives and so on. It's not illegal, we know that. That's not the problem. The problem here is that you can lobby for a state without actually saying that you are a lobbyist. The problem is that you are doing it with the cover of that you are in the academia or you are an expert or something else. So what is important, I think, is that we are being better in Sweden and more active in avslöja.
To reveal.
To reveal, yes, exactly, and to monitor them, expose them, and so on, so that people know what kind of narratives they are pushing for. Because people in Sweden in general don't know so much about Iran, of course. They cannot really see maybe all the patterns here or understand all the details and so on.
It's important to say that when we use the word lobby, I think we use it in a very capacious way. Right? So, who falls under the concept of lobby? It's not one type of person or one type of organization. There are several. And in academia, there may be people who are not officially, let's say, working for the Islamic Republic, but they are teaching things that somehow implicitly benefit the Islamic Republic in this network. So, for example, I remember reading works from Hamid Dabashi, who is a professor, a well-known professor in New York, and who's an opponent of the Islamic Republic, but he will write things like, political secularism is colonialism under the guise of modernity, right? And then students will read about that and think, yeah, political secularism is colonialism under the guise of modernity. And they'll use that to interpret the Iranian situation and not understand why, for example, people in Iran are demanding the separation of religion and state. Another example is, let's say you have an anthropologist who works in Iran, does research in Iran, and the monograph that the anthropologist who works, let's say, at a very big university, Ivy League university, it's not a monograph in defense of the Islamic Republic, but there are small details in the book that push against a certain kind of criticism. So, for example, you'll read I'm in religious studies, so for example, this anthropologist will describe Ahmad Kasradi, who's a well-known critic of Shiism from the early 20th century. But then he will not inform the American audience that this person was stabbed to death, right? By, let's say, Muslim extremists. And in this way, in a subtle way, you know, misleading students. And this, I think this goes, then I would like to connect this to your point that you just made now about free speech. So, you know, when we're criticizing the Iran, so-called Iran lobby, we're not against free speech. We're not against political diversity, the diversity of opinions. We know that those things are, you know, permanent features of a free society. You always have diversity of opinions. But what we're against is, you know, giving misleading information to people that poisons our public debate. It doesn't make our public debate actually more reasonable, right? I think that is why there's now push against the so-called Iran lobby, and why I also, as, let's say, a proponent of, you know, respecting political diversity, freedom of speech, I also agree with kind of, you know, going after the Iran lobby.
What can politicians do about the Islamic Republic lobbies?
You can create something which is like a people movement in Sweden to be involved in, ideell förening. Okay, you can create an organization and you can get funding from the local city council, kommunfullmäktige, for example, and then you can lobby for a state like Iran or Eritrea or something else. You can collect money to send to the regime and so on, or you can do it under kind of religious organization and so on. And I think that should somehow be regulated, so that you have to register if you're a lobbyist, basically. You have to do that in Brussels, in the European Union, for example, and you have to do it in Washington D.C., in the US and in UK and so on. So we could look at other countries who have that system and try to implement a similar system here.
Why have we not, are we not exposed as much to lobbyism? Or what's the problem? Why don't we have the same political force for?
I think that Sweden has been naive, but also that there are lots of organizations in Sweden who tend to be neutral or not political, who actually are that to a bigger degree. I would say that, but also when it comes to exposing, for example, what was mentioned in this excellent film before, that what they are trying to do, the Islamic regime narrative as I see it, and I heard the same yesterday. I had a radio debate with Rosbe Parsi about designating the Sepah Pasaran, Sepah Quds as a terrorist organization. He was against it. I was supporting it, of course. And then he bring up this narrative of we have to choose. Either we negotiate with the Iranian regime, or we escalate the situation and more or less go to a war with Iran. And that's a false choice. That is not the choice we have. The choice we have is that we could negotiate with Iran when there is a need for that, or when it could help our interests, for example. But at the same time, we need a broad and comprehensive agenda for pushing the Iranian regime and to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization could be one part in that agenda. So that kind of narrative they have been pushing for 20 years. And if you go to, for example, the Middle East, North Africa department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Sweden, at UD, probably many people there is also supporting that, because that's what they have heard for so many years in all the meetings and in the media, and no one has really confronted that kind of argumentation, for example. And that's a lobby argument. That's a lobbyist argument, basically. But it's described as some kind of a pragmatic way to, you know, try to de-escalate the tensions between the West and Iran.
The sacking of my father from the Tehran University. He was a professor of political science, so this is a personal matter, actually. But getting away from that, how the Islamic regime works with respect to lobbying is mostly via three ways, and there are a lot of studies on this. One of the ways are Islamic centers. You have the Imam Ali Mosque here in Sweden, in Stockholm. You have the Imam Ali Center in Hamburg, for example, in Germany. So that's one way, and they're quite open with it also. The other way the lobby works is through academia, and they do that by two ways. One of them is exactly what Pooyan was talking about. The other way is by producing articles and thus publishing these articles in international peer-reviewed papers, thus making science out of it. And that's a major issue, and that's a major problem. Because when you do discuss, for example, we did talk about Rouzbeh Parsi, who's the head of the Middle East program, but he was previously also the individual who gave advice about European Union's policy towards the Islamic Republic for years. Well, what do you think that his advices would be? And if you haven't listened to the debate which Fredrik and Rouzbeh had, please do so, because that's a textbook example of how lobbying is done. For maybe 20 years, NIAC, National Iranian American Council, have promoted that we have two ways with the Islamic regime. Either we negotiate or it will be war and destruction. They have been saying that over and over again. If we don't have the JCPOA, it will be war. If Trump gets out of the JCPOA, there will be war. If they kill Qasem Soleimani, there will be a war. Well, there were never a war, and there never will. And what Fredrik says here is what we really should emphasize on, that no, it's not this or that. It's that we don't negotiate with the Islamic Republic. We don't need to do that. And if we need to do that, we will do that based on specific principles. But the main problem with saying that is that we need to have people that will listen to us. And that's quite a problem. Exactly, once again, as Fredrik said, when you go to the Swedish Foreign Ministry and talk with individuals working with Middle East and Iran there, they are not listening to us, they are listening to Rouzbeh Parsi, they are listening to NIAC, they are listening to Dabbashi, for example. And what we need to do is that we need to get into that. We in the academia also needs to start publishing. We need to discuss these issues. And what are the main problems here? The main problems are twofold. It's the narrative they use, and it's the discourse they use. That's the two main problems we have. I hope we can discuss that a little bit more. But the third way they do lobbying, because the first one was Islamic culture centers, the second one was academia, and the third one are different organizations. NIAC is one, and the most recent one is the Quincy Institute, also founded by Trita Parsi, interestingly enough. What is a little bit difficult here is that even if we would have a regulation in Sweden, it would still be difficult to get to them. Because, actually, in my notes, I've always written in my text also that we need more laws. However, we have one of the most strict laws in the US, the Foreign Agent Act, as it's called. And still, NIAC is not registered as one and is not considered a lobby. So laws are one way to combat that. The other way puts a heavy responsibility on our shoulders to discuss this matter, to write and to publish.
What more can the contribution from academia be when it comes to neutralizing the Islamic Republic?
Let's say, constancy of this narrative about Iran. And you might, if you know the Iranian context, think that these publications are harmless, but actually they are being used in policy circles. I've experienced that myself in the Netherlands, in other countries, speaking with, officials of governments who say, we read this author, we read that author. They really do read these authors. So what do you find in these books? Well, for example, when you look at Iran, when Michel Foucault visited Iran, so short after the revolution, he wrote down that 95% of the population self-identifies as Shia Muslim. And then 25 years later, for example, a famous sociologist, Charles Kurzman, publishes a book about Iran, published by Harvard. Again, you find this figure that 95% self-identify as Shia. So nothing has changed in 25 years. And then another 20 years later, the World Values Survey Institute, one of the most important institutes in the world for producing quantitative data, did a research in Iran. They actually went to Iran, or at least hired a team there, did face-to-face interviews and concluded that, again, 95% of Iran self-identifies as Shia Muslim. So in 45 years, nothing has changed, right? So, I mean, you have to eat a little bit of common sense and just looking around the context, you already know that, well, that's not right? And there are also qualitative researchers, there have been qualitative researchers who demonstrated that. But still, the fact that these numbers get published in, important journals, in books published by Harvard, means that a so-called lobbyist can use them, right? So how do they use these books? For example, the New York Times publishes an article a few years ago in which an author claims that, the mandatory hijab is not such an important issue in Iran because people self-identify as Muslims, right? Look at the Pew Research Center, look at the World Values Survey. They're Muslims, so the hijab is not such a big deal. Actually, if there were no mandatory hijab, this is in the New York Times, they would still wear the hijab.
Even the males.
Yeah. So that's where, let's say, the rationale for Gaman comes from. That there's this misleading information, and our main aim, let's say, was to break open this, Pandora's box, you could say. So what we did, we started officially, we founded it in 2019, but Ammar Maliki and others who work with us know each other for longer than that, and we've been discussing these things for longer than that. But in 2019, because of the increasing internet penetration in Iran, and because of access that we had to some interesting data, and a combination of random factors, like, for example, the fact that we both got our PhDs and we had time, led to an experiment. What if we can get huge samples from inside Iran that are collected in an anonymous online way? Now, the good thing about anonymous online surveys is that you have a higher chance that people give you their honest view, right? The bad side, of course, is that the data that you collect is not going to be representative of that society. So what we do is we weight the data using different demographic and one political variable to try to balance it, to make it representative, right? Now, the other survey modes are like telephone interviewing or face-to-face interviewing. You have a problem right at the beginning because people don't give you their honest answer, right? So they're falsifying their own answers, or they don't even pick up the phone, right? So that data cannot be weighted. Whatever you do, you're not going to get the results that are more realistic. Whereas with online surveys, even though they have many problems, you can still try to weight them. That's our philosophy, let's say. So we had a huge sample in 2019. 200,000 people participated in a simple survey on the 40th anniversary of the Islamic Republic. Would you vote for the Islamic Republic in a free referendum, yes or no? And what we learned from that data after waiting is that the image that, let's say, the lobby presents is an image of a polarized landscape. You know, you have some people who are against the regime and you have many people who are for the regime, right? But actually, Iran is not a polarized society, because the ratio between regime supporters and regime opponents is not 50-50, right? It's more like, at the time, probably around 20-80, right? So it is a divided society. It is also a diverse society, but it's not polarized. And we learned that actually many people who voted for Rouhani, when you ask them, they say, well, you know, I voted for Rouhani, but if there were a free referendum, I would vote no for the Islamic Republic. Whereas the lobbyists always said that, you know, yeah, look, we have elections in Iran and 70% participated in the elections and they all voted, so what's the problem, right? So we showed that actually, well, we showed something that you all probably already knew. But the thing is that it was very important to in our communication with, let's say, universities and governments, to show evidence that people really don't want an Islamic Republic, right? Now that's where it started. I'll keep it very short. Maybe we can talk more about it in a bit. From there on, when Gammon started, we kind of our methodology is developing as we speak. So in 2020, we did a survey on religion. It was very interesting. We had very interesting results, but there were also criticisms that we didn't compare enough with external data. So we tried to do that in the next survey. Repeat the survey, compare more with external data. Then some people said, well, yeah, but it's still, you know, you're gathering data through social media channels, it's not good enough. We were fortunate that some people also reached out to us and tried to help us. For example, Siphon VPN, which is a very much used VPN software in Iran. They just voluntarily help us now. And what Siphon does is when we spread the survey link, they also spread it using their platform. That means that in Iran, if somebody wants to connect to the internet, and you know that many people have this software now, because even WhatsApp or even Instagram is filtered, they get a link from Siphon to our survey. So I'm talking about, for example, sending the survey link to 620,000 people in 3 days. Right? So big numbers. So you get a lot of information. And then it's still going on. So in December, in the latest survey, we actually had some help from television channels. Iran International spread our survey link. Siphon also did it. Voice of America, BBC didn't do it. They didn't want to help us.
Surprise, surprise.
And we're trying to, you know, get this published in academia, in conferences, in media circles. And I am optimistic, I do see a change, right? That, well, you know, 2 years ago, many venues didn't publish about us. Now we were cited several times in the Wall Street Journal, right? Even The Guardian, who doesn't really like us, cited us because our data shows that most Iranians don't want, you know, something like the mandatory hijab, and they don't want the Islamic Republic, right? And when they saw the protest happen, they thought, well, this seems to make sense, right? So they cited us. But even there, and then I'll stop, even there it's very interesting to see how The Guardian cited us, right? The subtleties of, let's say, lobbying or let's say, creating a biased narrative. So The Guardian cited our figure, saying that the majority of Iranians don't agree with compulsory hijab, right? But then in the next sentence, then the journalist writes, and that's why people in Iran are calling for reforms. But our data doesn't show that they're calling for reforms, right? So you see that they try to use us, our data, in that instance. So it is a battle, and it's very important that we take everything seriously. Right? All all levels should be taken seriously, in my view. It includes qualitative and quantitative data.
What they have achieved, the Islamic Republic, is that they have pushed very hard for a narrative in the West, especially in the European Union, and also in Sweden, that the Iranian regime or structure is not one regime, it's basically two. Is the hawkish right-wingers, so to say, within the regime, and then there are the good guys, the reformists, the Khatami, Rouhani, Zarif, whatever you call them. And that we should somehow try to strengthen those reformists. But on the other hand, no one has ever brought up a manifesto for reforms in Iran. Never. They are talking about reforms. It's just a word. They have never in detail described what kind of reforms they want to push for. And I think what has happened now is that this whole concept of describing the Iranian regime or the way the regime is portrayed in the West is it has to be updated. And you can see that 70% of the population in Iran today are under 30 years old. And you see the protests all over the country. And there are many young people. They are born after 1979. And what these lobbyists, NIAC for example, what they are offering, all the people who are out in the streets in Iran, what they are offering them is that, well, you could vote for a reform candidate within the system. But people are tired of that. It doesn't matter if you are Persian, Kurd, Azeri, Baluch, Arab, whatever you are. You can have lots of divisions. Iran is a very diverse society, but people agree at least on one thing. They want freedom. They agree that they want freedom. So the role, a person like Rosberg Parsi, for example, the role he has here now is the same as to find an example. Let's say that this is 1989 in November, and people in Berlin has rushed to the wall with hammers, and they start there, and tearing down this wall. And then a couple of meters away is then the Rosberg Parsi version of 1989, a guy, and says that, well, guys, is this really necessary? Couldn't we just, talk with the Communist Party and Stasi, and maybe they could be a little more inclusive, they could listen a little bit more, and then we could try to move on, and everything would be better. Please, go home, don't stand there, don't try to do this. This is exactly the same position, and we have had this in Europe, these kind of, what is it called, medlöpare, apologists, people who are always trying to somehow find a justification for the oppression. And I think that the Iranian diaspora has done a tremendous work globally now in exposing this, because I see that there is a shift. And also you can see that the same persons in for example, the one who was foreign minister when the people in the Swedish government went to Tehran with this reactionary, followed this most reactionary dress code, which ordinary Iranians don't follow themselves, of course, women. They dressed up like, I don't know how to, you know what happened. And Margot Wallström, she went out a couple of months ago and wrote that we need to shift the policy against Iran, for example. That's one example. So I think that there is something going on here also in the Western capitals, that there is a shift. The problem is that if you should try to somehow update the Western policy against Iran, we don't know what kind of policy should we impose that could be successful.
That's a totally different panel. But it's fine. I just want to go back to the academia when it comes to neutralizing the Islamic Republic lobbies. You said something, Ardavan, about publishing more. Can we be more organized? What else can we do, and how to go about it?
Absolutely. We can never be too organized. Organization is of utmost importance. So is leadership, and that's what is lacking today. For example, the examples you took, brilliant. I mean, going back to Michel Foucault, he went to Iran just after the revolution had succeeded, and when in France, Michel Foucault had started several committees in support of Khomeini. They were called the Committees of Support for Khomeini, and there were several of them in France. And when he came to Iran, he wrote a piece for a French newspaper about the Jaleh Square massacre. You've all heard of that, the major demonstration, and it is said that the soldiers shot, and according to Michel Foucault, 15,000 individuals were killed. And still in 2022, 2023, oh my God, yeah. So 2023, you have still books that are published stating that thousands and thousands and thousands of individuals were killed at the Jaleh Square when the Islamic Republic itself, via Emadine Bari, at the Foundation of Martyrs, stated that 68 people were killed during that day, of which around 42 or 45 were at the Jaleh Square, the rest other places in Tehran, for example. That's how lobbying works. Or if you look at publications conducted by the European Union on Iran, you say that they refer to these lobbies. You say that they refer to publications by individuals we have talked about today. Why are not they referring to us instead? It's just as valid, and our academic degrees are much higher than those other individuals, if I'm allowed to be a little bit arrogant. So what we need to do, we need definitely to organize ourselves. We need to publish. We need to use sound science so that we can battle them and confront them even on that aspect. That's very, very important, especially when, just like you said, when these publications are used in policy making, and that's where we need to attack.
So we see the shift in when it comes to communication and how to, bring information to the public. There's definitely a shift there. So to the digital era. How can we use the power of the digital era in doing so, the neutralizing the lobbyists? Do you think it's up to anybody, or should somebody, do you definitely need an academian background to be trustworthy, or can...
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. Well, in the academic field, maybe you need to be an academic,
Yeah.
but not outside of it. I mean, if you look at different articles which have been written during the past years against NIAC, or in Sweden during the past months, with respect to Rosebeck Parsi and so on and so forth, many of them that have written these papers in different newspapers, they are not academics. And that's great. You don't need to be an academic to do this. The fact that you can oppose them on the social media, that you can, for example, if Swedish television, SVT, invites an individual calling him an Iran expert, protest to that. Say that, you know what, it's good, he may be an Iran expert, he may be a good researcher, but he's not the Iran expert. There are many other Iran experts. Please ask them also, so that they can give different views and different and how it works. So no, this is not an academic thing. It's an everybody thing, and everybody needs to be involved in this.
Back to you, Pooyan. I just wanted to ask you, what's the next upcoming survey about? Do you have anything planned?
Well, I was just writing the report this morning before I came here. We did, so in February 2022, we had a survey on political systems, which created a lot of also consternation, and people have a hard time accepting that Iranians are politically diverse. But it shows also clear at the same time a clear, let's say, general will towards freedom and equality and the demand for political secularism. Now in December 21st to 31st, we conducted another survey, this time on the protests. And that's the one that I think we had the largest sample ever. We had 250,000 samples in total. We had 150,000 completed samples from inside Iran and 50,000 completed samples from outside Iran. And the report will be published in about a week time in Persian and English on gammon.com. And so far we were busy with modeling, finding interesting ways to make the data representative. And it's really fascinating. So to give you a few examples, in all our surveys, the raw sample is always overrepresented by men. Men participate in surveys more than women, right? Always. We had 20 to 30% participation of women, and then you have to use the software to weight the data. It's good if you have thousands of women participating, you could do it, right? But it's a fact. Now this time, for the first time, we had more than 40% participation from women, which clearly shows that they have been activated, right? We have, for example, very interesting results on, for example, the importance of your friends in your life. Now, when people think about a survey about protests, they're not necessarily thinking about that question. That's a question that they kind of answer and go to the next one. But it's a really interesting question. So, in all our surveys, and if you also look at other survey institutes' results, like the World Value Survey, the importance of friends that Iranians report in their life is consistent. And it's different from Sweden, right? Countries have different patterns of, what the general population finds important, work or family or friends. And now what's very interesting is that in all our surveys we had the same result, but this time the importance of friends went up. So I think it shows something about the atmosphere. Another very interesting result is that many people express the hope that this will become a revolution, a successful revolution, right? Now, whether that is the case or not the case, I think it's very important to use this data to go for, let's say, a less superficial analysis of what is happening in Iran. You see now that the so-called Iran lobbyists, one of the new narratives is, okay, the protests have died out, it's not a revolution, so you, European governments, that's then the implicated idea that's not stated, you should deal with the Islamic Republic. Right? You should negotiate with the Islamic Republic. You should not put them on the terror list. But if you look at it more deeply, this data shows that there's a tremendous shift in terms of people's attitudes, radicalization of attitudes towards the idea of a Taghyir-e-Nizam, regime change, right? So we clearly see, even with our own surveys, a difference between now and a year ago and 2 years ago. And that's, I think, that is really important. And there were other questions we also asked, for example, about religion, and that's something that would be published in a journal article, but I can say that the results confirm earlier results. So that's also what we try to do, is like build a strong case for claiming something big. Maybe one more thing about how then this combats the lobby. Sorry, then I'll stop. In the Netherlands we have let's say, a big newspaper, a good newspaper is called, one of them is called NRC Handelsblad. It's a national newspaper, it's read by, let's say, university educated people. And at this newspaper, there are journalists who write things like, yeah, the protest died out, and don't worry about it, deal with the regime. Or, for example, one of the journalists even wrote that, quote, Iran is not a theocratic dictatorship. This is in the national newspaper of the Netherlands. A literal quote, right? The same person who wrote that wrote another opinion piece, her name is Caroline Roelands, in which she argued against removing Iran from the UN Women's Rights Commission, right? So, you have to be kind of blind not to see what's going on here. Now, these people will do whatever they can to make sure that we are not cited in that newspaper. I can tell you that I was personally called by the Middle East correspondent of the NRC Handelsblad. And he told me that, one time you were cited by this newspaper, you and your colleague Ammar Maliki. There was a big discussion in the newspaper, and they don't want to cite you anymore, right? And why do they not want to cite us anymore? Because journalist A calls an academic in London, so it's a journalist in the Netherlands, who calls an academic in London, says, who is this guy Ammar Maliki? And then that academic in London says, oh, yeah, he's a right-wing monarchist, which is not even true. He's actually for Republic. And then the journalist says, oh, we don't want a right-wing monarchist in our newspaper. Right? So, why I give this example is because, first of all, someone is really, lying. This is lying. And also, it's interesting that the Middle East correspondent personally called me to tell me this. So I also got the sense that somewhere he felt guilty, and so he had to kind of share this information with me.
Are you gonna conduct any surveys about future leadership of Iran?
Yeah. I'm sorry, I forgot to. So in the several surveys in the past, and now again in this one, we asked about the formation of a so-called, let's say, Solidarity Council, or whatever you want to call it, and the different, persons that will be part of such a council, and what do people think about the participation of such people outside Iran, inside Iran. Should it be with people inside Iran, or is it also, because of the political circumstances, okay if they just have the support from people inside who cannot just so openly speak out? Think of people like Hossein Ronari or Majid Tawakoli. So that is definitely there, and then we try to measure, how popular are different politically important or influential people at this moment. Why that's important is, I think, because it can give you an idea of to what extent certain factions combined represent the Iranian people. It's never going to be 100%, right, by definition. But if you can gather a group of people that represent roughly 2/3, that's already pretty good, right? So I think we have to be also more realistic and professional, and to then use this data to ask European governments to invite these people. Invite Hamid Esmailion to the European Parliament, for example, right? Like Macron invited Masih Alinejad. Do these things. It's definitely going to hurt the Islamic Republic.
Thank you. So if we continue to discuss the lobbyists, what do you think about the lobbyists in Sweden? This question is to Fredrik and Ardavan.
Well, since Rosbe Parsi is more or less the only one who are invited to the Swedish public radio to talk about Iran, so there are not so many other people who are in in the public discussion here. This is interesting. I wrote an article to Expressen a couple of months ago about the problems with the NIAC and so on. And then I went on the Swedish Parliament on the internet. I have access to this. It's called Retriever. It's like a media search for articles and so on. So I did a search for Rosberg Parsi and the Swedish Public Radio, Sveriges Radio, and I think I got like 20 pages of search results. So I started to listen to many of them, you know, and you can see what is quite interesting is that if you as a listener in Sweden only consume those analyses about the situation in Iran, you get pretty much the feeling that Iran is just an ordinary country. They have elections, there are different candidates in the election, and no one really knows who will win the election. And there are protests in Iran. Basically, they are not about freedom, they are about the price for, I don't know, paneer rosati, bread, cheese, so on. And we need and Iran also needs to be, you know, to sit down by the table, because Iran plays a very important role for solving the conflicts in the region, in Syria, in Iraq, and so on. And I think that the true character of the regime is never really brought up in those analyses. And the thing is that if you only invite one person who should, and then that person don't get any hard questions from the program leader in the program, because the person is there to tell the listeners about what is going on. So there is not really a debate about it. And then I think that also what Ardavan said, that to write in social media and so on, that is very important, but also write to the media in Sweden and give examples for other persons they can invite. Because what happened was that they cancelled Rosberg Parsi's participation in Folk och Försvar, this big conference about defense, and what happened was that suddenly he became some kind of a victim instead, that he was cancelled. And I think that I don't think that the Iranians in Sweden wants just to cancel people. I think that what people are critical to is that lots of other people are indirectly cancelled when they are never invited to talk. So that's one thing. And then just to end, what these lobbyists also now do is you know, something called Goodwin's law, that if you have a discussion, in the end someone will bring up Hitler. When it comes to Iran, someone in the end always will bring up Donald Trump. So Trita Parsi wrote a reply on my article in Expressen, and the strongest argument he could bring up against me was that Fredrik Malm, he is pushing for the same policy as Donald Trump. So Donald Trump is some kind of a symbol here among those people, just to show that he's some kind of like he is a little fishy here, you know. He seems to be close to Donald Trump. I hate Donald Trump, if you ask me. I don't like him at all. I think he is a terrible leader, and I deeply regret that the American people elected him. But that cannot be an argument in the debate also.
Discussing the lobbies here in Sweden, we have only Rosberg Parsi, who is very active in that matter. We do have people from the Imam Ali Mosque also, but not in such obvious ways. However, we do have individuals that are quite active on the social media, somehow moving forward the narrative of the regime. For example, in a university in Sweden, I'm not going to name the name of the university, but in a university in Sweden, you have a PhD student in political science, and when you go to his website at the university and his social media, he is clearly stating that he was a lead analyst of the Ministry of Intelligence for several years, and now he's in Sweden, being a former employee of the Press TV, and now having his PhD in Sweden. So there are many individuals like that which have some effect at the social media, but it's only one individual that's overtly talking about the narrative of the Islamic regime, and that's Rouzbeh Parsi. However, if we take that a little bit upwards, some Swedish politicians have also during the years been quite positive towards the regime. And I would like to name Carl Bildt for one. He traveled to Iran, he came back, he said that Iran is not what you think it is. I mean, the same narrative. And then you had also Jan Eliasson who met with Zarif and they hugged together. And just for a couple of weeks ago, when I wrote this again in my Twitter, Jan Eliasson wrote to me that, but I was only doing my part as a CIPRI, an organization here in Stockholm. And I was asking, do you hug everyone having some kind of a blood on their hands? He didn't want to answer that. But after that, Fredrik wrote that article about Rouzbeh in Expressen. Jan Eliasson went out stating that Rouzbeh Parsi is one of the most outstanding experts on the Middle East I have ever met. So it's interesting to see the connections and the contacts they have.
No, I mean, we have free media, and it's different sections in the newspaper, of course. You have the editorial pages and debate articles and what is just news and commentators and so on. But of course, when we are talking about totalitarian regimes like, I mean, Iran, China and Russia are the only countries, maybe also Eritrea, I'm not sure, who are actually mentioned in the yearly annual report from the Swedish intelligence service SÄPO as states who are active in subversive activities in Sweden. Of course, there are lots of other countries who also are, but those are the only countries who are mentioned. So I think that our authorities and also our media has a big responsibility here also to cover that and also to give room for different and diverse voices and so on. Ardavan mentioned, by the way, that Trita Parsi, after he left Nyack, he founded this Quincy Institute. There is a very good article about that if you go to tabletmag.com or org, and there is a long article there called Washington's Weirdest Think Tank, where you can read more about Quincy Institutes and the institute and the people behind it. Yeah.
May I also add a little bit something to what you just asked? So, the individual who's doing a PhD in Sweden, I have to know who you're talking about, so I won't mention the name, but it's very interesting to see what kind of connections exist internationally with such a person in different institutes, let's say journalistic venues. So this person is doing a PhD in Sweden, right, in political science, writing devil advocate pieces that somehow implicitly or even explicitly benefit the Islamic Republic. Now then, before this person was just doing only that, it's a he, I can say that. He was also affiliated in the Netherlands with an institute called the Klingendahl Institute, which is a think tank used by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for counterterrorism, right? And the person who hired him in the Netherlands, he's a big fan of Trita Parsi. So it's also important to recognize that there are many non-Iranian people of certain political persuasions who give these people institutional affiliation. Okay, it's, I think, very crucial. Otherwise, they wouldn't have grown at all. Now, what happens is that this person goes back to Sweden. Another person is hired in the Netherlands who's a friend of these guys. This person was several years long, so now based in The Hague, a professor at the Iranian university working on politically sensitive topics. So you don't become a professor in Tehran, for example, when you work on geopolitics just like that. Right? So then these people produce texts. For example, foreign policy. So now is again another country where this venue is based, foreign policy. Foreign policy publishes these people's texts, and they cite a survey institute called Iran Poll. But what does Iran Poll claim? Iran Poll claims that, for example, Raisi is very popular in Iran. Iran Poll claims that the majority of Iranians support the actions of Sepah in the region. Right? So how is it that Iran Poll claims such a thing? Well, they use telephone surveying. Right? Then these data become mixed with another big survey institute called Gallup. Gallup also claimed that Raisi is hugely popular. According to the Islamic Republic's official numbers, Raisi received around 30% of the total vote. Okay? Of all the people who could vote. According to Gallup, a few months after that, his popularity was 70%. So that, I mean, that's just like fantastic, even compared to what the Islamic Republic is saying. Right? And if you then look at the methodology, so for example, Gallup's phone survey, which is then confirming Iran Poll, was based on house telephones, not cell phones. And so if you look at their sample, you see a very large rural sample, right? It's as if, like, I think if you would have done a survey in a mosque, it would be less positive towards privacy. And then, of course, from the rural side, it's not all the people, but certain people who answer the phone and so on. But they say, well, this is an established method, so it's scientific. Yeah? So why is it scientific? Yeah, because we say so. You know, we just follow the procedures, it's scientific. And then this, again, is used in Klingendahl Institute, it's used in PhD research in Sweden, and it spreads, right? And so I think what we need to do, just very practically, is ask our governments, this is what we asked in the Netherlands, to actually research these guys, to map the Iran lobby in Europe. Because European governments have much more means to actually, find out what is going on. They haven't been studying that for a long time, and I think that is certainly something that is feasible.
I actually have a question about Joseph Borrell. What do we think about the connection when it comes to the statement that he did recently and the lobbyists?
And I'm quite sure that he's not only being lobbied by individuals living outside of Iran, but I'm also sure that the Islamic regime in itself is lobbying. And that's also the reason for the statements he does, not only now, but also for several years, being one of the most prominent supporters of the Islamic regime in the EU.
What can we do? And why, I mean, are we talking about numbers? Is it because of the number of lobbyists?
I think what we need to do is that we need to make Swedish media understand that absolutely Rosenberg Parsi is a scientist, he has a PhD, he's a researcher, he's been at Lund University, he's at the Utrikespolitiska Institutet now, and so on and so forth. And please do invite him. Yes. But you need to start inviting other individuals as well. Because just like Fredrik said, Iran, for maybe 20 years, they have tried to learn us that Iran is two countries, the reformists and the conservatives, while we have been shouting out that, dude, they're the same, they're one. There's no difference between them. They are all loyal to the constitution of the Islamic Republic. They are all loyal to the principles of the Islamic Republic. And what we need to pressure the media. So whenever they, for example, interview Rouzbeh Parsi, we need to send emails, talk about it in social media, that why only Rouzbeh Parsi? Why didn't you invite someone else? Why didn't you let Fredrik Malm come and answering, for example? Why didn't you let blah 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 come and answering, for example? That is what we really need to do, to keep that pressure, and also to have a more open dialogue with Swedish political parties. Let's not forget that Rouzbeh Parsi was not invited or was cancelled from Folk och Försvar thanks to the political youth organizations. So we need to have an open dialogue with these individuals, with politicians, and to make them understand that there are two narratives, the regime's narrative and the truth. And you need to have both of them if you insist on having Rouzbeh, for example.
Yes, Fredrik.
No, but I think that the Iranian regime has fallen as an ideological project. What is left now, the backbone of what is left of the regime is the oppressive, brutal forces, the Sepah Pastaran, Sepah Quds, Basij, and so on. That is what is protecting the regime. So the aim should be to limit their capabilities, basically. That's why this, to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization would be part of that. Of course, it could be, wouldn't help directly, but if you can freeze more assets and so on and go after companies who are connected to them and so on. But also I think that the people who have always argued for this concept that we should strengthen the so-called reform camp within the regime, the problem for them is that there are not so many reformists left within the regime who can act. They are in house arrest, or, I mean, we know that the elections in Iran are rigged, but the latest election was like double rigged. It was rigged, and it was rigged so the one who got elected also became elected. You know, it was, they were, it's like the elections in Azerbaijan when they published their results the day before the election, and Ilham Aliyev won the election by 82% or something. So I think what is important now is how can we shape a new approach towards the Iranian regime from a country like Sweden or the European Union and so on. And that discussion is I think very important. And I think that when Iran decided to enter the war in Ukraine and exporting those
Drones.
Shahed drones to Russia, it's a very clear signal to politicians in Europe that they are here also now. It's not just down there. It's also here. It's a threat to us, a direct threat to us, and so on.
I have one question. It's to you, Ardavan. You were talking about the Islamic Center. Besides from espionage and money laundering, what other kind of lobbyism, or I mean, what are they doing?
Well, you do have both overt operations they do, but also covert. And what they do covert, except for espionage, is also helping the regime with information gathering or intelligence gathering. I mean, Sweden is a country where you really can't hide anything. With a couple of phone calls, you can have the whole information of an individual in front of you. Does he own a dog? What's the name of the dog? How often does the dog go to the veterinary, and so on and so forth? So I mean, these informations are brought to Iran for intelligence organizations. However, of course, the Islamic regime is not that stupid. So when they are planning terrorist operation, which they often do from Sweden, this is something which the Swedish security police have stated, and we did also see that when Asadullah Assadi was arrested, and we saw, for example, that he was in Sweden more than 10 times meeting different agents of the regime. And these agents, of course, they are not employed by the Imam Ali Mosque and so on and so forth. So we need to both focus on the overt organizations and the cover people who are working for the regime. And it's espionage, it's planning terrorism, and it's also acts of terrorism. Like Fredrik said in the beginning, that we have 2 individuals that have been killed in Sweden by the Islamic regime, at the hands of the Islamic regime. In one of the operations, it's quite sad to say that the Swedish security police also arrested the culprit. But instead of keeping him, they just put him on the next plane back to Tehran. And that person became the main responsible for the Mykonos assassination taking place in Germany soon after. So we need to be focusing on both the covert part but also on the overt part. When you label someone as a criminal, you can almost do nothing about it anymore. You cannot rehabilitate that person because you have already labeled him. And labeling individuals may make them be more criminal or continue their criminal path. And you know, it's a little bit like that here, because if you show that a lobbyist, his narrative is false, and his narrative is because he wants to promote another regime, of course, if you destroy that, exactly like you said, his academic career is over, more or less. So the question is, can we dissemble that in a nice way without labeling them as regime agents, for example? And well, yes, definitely we can do that. However, we can only do that with respect to individuals that have just started to be part of this narrative. Because we can talk with them, we can say, well, don't you agree that this is not the complete truth? And maybe they change their minds. But to do that now towards individuals like Trita Parsi, like Roosevelt Parsi and so on, that's fully impossible because it's been so long. And even if they come now and say, you know what, we did a mistake, I'm very sorry. The next question will be, well, what if you do another mistake very soon? Can we trust you? So that's a problem. So focusing on individuals who are already part of the narrative is very important, and I don't think we can get around that.
So, if you know my colleague Ammar, he's an intense guy, right? When he's on television, Iranian television, he's ruthless. I remember his PhD dissertation; it was gruesome. The only thing I remember is that he said, "I disagree," and then destroyed the professor who asked the question. So you need people like that. But a few months ago, a distant relative of mine, the writer Dina Nayeri, who was raised in the United States, she wrote a long piece in New York Magazine about our work. And Dina writes novels, also non-fiction these days. And she went to, let's say, Princeton. She went to Harvard. She has she lived in New York. She's a typical, let's say, educated Democrat, right? And there are a lot of people in, let's say, her circles who are sympathetic to some of the discourses that say that hijab is not such a big issue because we don't want to be racist, right? So if you study her text, it's very interesting. She writes in such a subtle way, and that's why you need a creative person for that she allows her friends not to how do you say that in English? Lose face, right? To kind of retain. So we're not talking about professional lobbyists, but as you say, like the audiences of the lobbyists, for them to retain face or not lose face, right? Yeah, I think so. We need empathy for that. We need creativity. We need patience. We need an inclusive way of explaining. It's not going to work for everybody. So that's why I believe in multiple ways of doing this. There's not one. We don't need only Dinas or only Ammars, right? But we also need people who do that work that I think you're suggesting. I think that's very if you want to be listened to, that's important. And then another thing I think is very important that when somebody like Hossein Ronavi writes in the Wall Street Journal a piece that the media's reporting on Iran is not fair, right? And the support he gets from ordinary Iranians, who are then called by Twitter Parsi bots and so on, that support is really crucial. In that sense, I'm very optimistic, because I think that Iranians inside Iran, they know much better English these days, they are very educated, they are a lot in contact with Iranians in Europe and America. I think that also that kind of increased interaction of Iranians inside and outside also undoes one of the, let's say, lobby's favorite distinctions, namely people inside and outside. Oh, you're outside, and you shouldn't say anything because you don't really understand how it is. Let me tell you how it is. And now that's crumbling, right? But it's crumbling because ordinary Iranians inside and outside are, supporting Hossein Ronavi when he's writing a piece, or people like Dina have the access to New York Magazine. We didn't have that kind of access on such a scale even 10 years ago.
It's convenient that you don't have to do so much, against Iran. It's convenient, and some countries in Europe, I think, are also a little bit scared of what Iran can do to them. For example, if Sweden should push a tougher line against Iran, then suddenly an Iranian in Sweden going back to Iran for meeting his relatives or so on will be taken to prison, and then we have to go into a negotiation about that and so on, or that things could happen and so on. It's also that fear, I think. But as I said earlier, there is an urgent need to update the policy in the Western countries towards the Iranian regime. I think that is the most important issue, and I think that some of these people also inside this NIA group and so on, when they look at what happened in Iran today, they can't be that happy either, when they see that the people they have put trust in, that they have put confidence in this reformist camp, that they don't have hardly no leverage anymore towards the regime. So maybe there are people also who are actually can go out publicly and say that I was wrong. I was wrong. I believed in a policy that doesn't work anymore, and reality shows that we need also to take a tougher line. I think that is what our former foreign minister Michael Fosman has realized, for example.
So what we do from here is, my suggestion would be that a couple of individuals need to sit down, talk together, set up a couple of principles, and then not necessarily start an organization, but they can if they want to, and then decide how to move forward from here, and try to how do you say this? Try to spread what what people should do. So, for example, one should be responsible for this part, one should be responsible for the other part, and so on and so forth. Because the main issue we have the main issue we have with political organizations and so on is that people get tired after a while and let go. And that's the biggest problem we have. And so how can we fix that? Well, we need to be many so that we can so that we can have different roles and different aspects. That's the most important thing. Because without an organization, and I don't mean that we need to have an organization with a name and the logo, because then we will be fighting what the logo should be. What I want instead is that some kind of a gathering that can work together.
There are in different institutions people who give such lobbyists a platform, and they have their own interests. In academia, ideological interests are very important, and so that will have a huge impact on who is hired or not hired. And if you look at, let's say, Survey Institute, who works with businesses that sell products in Iran, they have, again, other interests. So the lobby does not have one interest, let's say. It's a multi-dimensional, multi-interested thing, beast.
That people maybe think of different things when they hear the word. I don't know what the right word is. You can have different words, but what we can see is that it's complex. I mean, if you look, for example, if you take the United States now, there are lots of investments from the Gulf states in think tanks in the US, Qatar, the Emirates, and so on. They are investing heavily in institutions like Brookings or other think tanks, Heritage Foundation and others. And probably we will see the same in Europe with investments and so on. And of course, Iran can also invest in that kind of institutions. So there is not like, so it's more complex. And in Sweden we have our own context where we have lots of organizations who, when you hear the name of them, they seem to be very good, organizations, ordinary organizations, but at the same time they are heavily involved in pushing for specific policies and so on. And that's also kind of lobbying, but we call it in Sweden remissinstanser or frivilliga organisationer or something else. So that's what I try to say, that some kind of regulation I think would be good. But exactly as Ardavan said, that there will always be gaps and so on within a system like that. But it's more or less unregulated in Sweden now.
Very good question, and of course there is one very good example with that, and his name is Kaveh Afrasiabi. And Kaveh Afrasiabi, he's it's so strange talking English and then pronouncing names in Farsi.
I understand.
He works as an academic. He has written for several different journals. One of the academic organizations he's been part of is the Belfer Center, which is one of the most prestigious security studies institutions of the world. And I think it was just one day after or one day before the inauguration of Joe Biden, where FBI raided his house in Massachusetts and arresting him. And the reason they arrested him was because they meant that he is a foreign agent of the Islamic Republic. And they could also show that he had received I don't remember the exact figures. I think it was something around $200,000.
That's correct.
That's correct. From the ambassador of the Islamic Republic at the United Nations. So that's one very good example. And here is the fun part about it. So he was arrested in 2021, and he was in jail for a couple of weeks or days or something before he was released. And 3 years after, we are still waiting for the Department of Justice to take actions. And there is some theories stating that the Department of Justice and the FBI do not want to take this action quite yet because they are afraid that the JCPOA discussions between Iran and the US will not work. So I'm quite sure that the fate of the JCPOA can be read and can be understood with what the Department of Justice do. So if the Department of Justice suddenly decides that we don't have any evidence, then you know that we have a deal. But if they still keep holding him, then we still don't have a deal. I think that's an analysis we can give. But he's a very clear and quite new example of the money they give.
And actually what I found...
But some non-Iranian origin, blonde people. Who get money?
Well, I should not name names here.
No, regarding blonde people, I don't have any names. However, the Press TV, which is the TV belonging to the regime, they have several blonde and non-blonde individuals assigned to them, working with the headscarves and with so on and so forth. So there you have it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But what I find bewildering is that this person, Afrasiabi, so he wrote for the New York Times, right?
Oh.
And how is it possible that such a person like that, who's then arrested, who has been writing in the New York Times, how is it possible that this doesn't become a huge scandal for the New York Times? It should be very big news. I was surprised that there's just so very little attention for it. And that is definitely, if anybody's a journalist, please write about it. This is really strange.
I have not written any proposal, but I think it's good if you know who you meet, and for example, you could see in other countries it's more transparent, and that's I want our system to be a little bit more transparent, and especially when it comes to states that are hostile to us.
The answer, or the whatever you want to call it, the information that I have received from media when approaching them about Rouzbeh Parsi, and I've always said, please invite somebody else too, so that we can basically show what he's good for. But the problem is that because of what you said, lack of knowledge, the media houses, they get scared, so that's why they cancel. Also, I want to point out that from the media perspective, I mean, it's not like we have tons of journalists with the Iranian background here, so they understand the complexity of the situation. So that's why I think when it comes to the lobbyists, because they're using such a subtle way of conveying whatever expertise they have, people don't understand. So if they say protest, we say revolution. If I'm just like very on top of my head kind of comparison.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. The writer I mentioned, Dina Nayeri, she was in contact with a professor called Azadeh Moaveni, who taught at New York University, if I recall correctly. And Dina had just no idea that Azadeh had actually written in the New York Times, I believe in 2017, that women in Iran would still wear the hijab if there were no compulsory hijab. But I mean, the overwhelming majority would still do that. And so when I showed Dina that, look, this is in the New York Times, she was shocked, because she was not thinking about these issues. It's not her first concern, and it was for her kind of so commonsensical to think that, well, of course the majority of women don't like the compulsory hijab, that even if it's in the New York Times written by somebody that she knows, that she just didn't kind of see it.
Yeah.
You really have to point it out.
Yes.
You have to each time point it out, and even if you think it's common sense. So, and in that, I am actually hopeful. I am optimistic. I think that the beginning of this panel, we also heard that there has been a shift. Some of the players on the chessboard are being changed, and I think a lot of that is going to happen by informing people, explaining to them, as good as we can.
To me, I mean, I'm as a Swede, with lots of Iranian friends though, but still as a Swede, I'm kind of an outsider when I look at what is happening in Iran. But the country is very diverse, as I see it, and I think that there is a need of more unity and like a platform at least, or something which, I mean, hopefully a big majority of the different groups and civil organizations, unions, different ethnic groups and so on could agree on, and probably if that should be if that could be achieved, I think it would be very, very good. But it also, there are everyone has not the same vision of how a future Iran would look like, of course. So I think that unity, I think, is very good, and I think that what we see today with all the protests for 4 months now over the whole country, it's a very good sign of that. But I think that there are socio-economic factors also. As I said, that 70% of the population are under 30 years old, for example. People are, and the regime is like exploiting this old, look what happened 1953 to Mossadegh and so on. And the young people in Iran, even their parents weren't born then. So it's a new reality. It's a different society. I think Iran will never look the same again, even if they should crush this rebellion. But people are unarmed. We know that. People don't have arms. The Revolutionary Guards, the Basij has that, and they are torturing people brutally. I mean, extremely, and shooting right into masses of people and so on. So for me, it's more like a moral obligation to support the people in Iran, but it's also a change must come from within, and everything we can do to help creating a tools and an environment for making these changes from within Iran. It's very, very important.